Hey, thank you all for tuning in to our next event tonight. This event is pre-recorded from a couple of weeks ago. Amar Patel had a call with the Young Americans for Solidarity at the University of Illinois, where he talked about how the ASP can redeem American politics. So I'm glad to be sharing this with you. I hope you're enjoying day two of our speaker series. Our last event ran a little over schedule, but it was an incredible conversation. And if you haven't seen that, I would encourage you to go watch it. We have two more events after this one tonight, but I will give you more information on that once this talk concludes. So, without further ado, here is the talk that Amar gave to our college chapter at the University of Illinois.
Thanks. I appreciate that. I'm going to start. I'm just making sure the recording is active before I fully get into this because I've screwed that up in the past. Let's put it that way. Okay. Hello, my name is Amar Patel, and welcome to the talk, How the Solidarity Party Can Redeem American Politics. This talk is serving two purposes. First, it is a follow-up to a speech that Catholic University of America professor and American Solidarity Party Advisory Board member, Dr. Chad Pecknold, delivered last week at the University of Illinois to the Young Americans for Solidarity student organization, entitled, Can America Be Saved? The Promise and Peril of Post-Liberal Politics. It is also going to be included in the American Solidarity Party Fall Speaker Series event this weekend as a promotion for the presidential election and the Sonsky campaign. So for those of you who didn't witness the Chad Pecknold talk, I'm going to give you some details that should help tie in from that speech into what I'm going to say. And the first thing he talked about was the definition of post-liberalism. So that was a focus of his talk, and he went on for quite some time, giving you a lot of background, history, and philosophy. And I'm not going to do all of that just for the sake of time. And also, I'm not an expert in the way that he is about philosophy or theology. But one of the first things that I think is very important that Dr. Pecknold did say is he made the following statement. Post-liberal politics is simply the recognition that while liberalism has been enormously successful at dominating the world, the principles are no longer effective or operative. They just don't work. Peak liberalism is destructive, and we see the carnage all around us. People are unhappy and are searching for competing alternative frameworks to liberalism. This is something we see happening not just in our country, but all over the world. So post-liberal politics, we can say, is a recognition of the failure of liberalism to secure certain goods for human flourishing. And Professor Pecknold talked in depth about how there is not a singular post-liberal philosophy, but multiple critiques of liberalism that come from different angles, both religious and irreligious, both on the right and on the left. And then his concluding statement, though, was the following, and it's very important. He said that I think the public recognition of God is essential to any post-liberal politics that can save America. If a Nietzschean wants to disagree with me, they can and will do so. But it will be incumbent upon all of us to ask whether the post-liberal rebellion against God will turn out any better than the liberal rebellion against God did. I think that's a fantastic end to his speech, and it actually launches me into where I want to go. Okay. At the beginning and end of his talk, obviously don't do his entire talk justice, but it's something that I can at least leave you with if you hadn't heard the entire thing. It's a good couple of sound bites that bring together the concept pretty well. So I've been asked to explain the following: how the Solidarity Party can redeem American politics. And so with that as the title, the first question has to be, does American politics need to be redeemed? It's a fair question. But I think the resounding answer, and I'm sure the people that are going to be listening to this would agree that yes, that is something that is definitely a true statement, that the American political system needs to be redeemed. If you search engine the question, is our political system broken? You will come across multiple sources that paint a harrowing picture of the American sentiment. Okay. I want to say most of them say 80, 70, 90% of people think that, the Senate is broken, the House is broken, or the federal government is broken. It's just staggering numbers. And just recently, in this presidential election, the two major parties managed to come up with arguably the two most flawed presidential candidates in history. And still, somehow, voters are falling over themselves to convince each other that choosing the lesser of two evils is still the right path. So, to dive a little deeper into the brokenness of American politics and just of us as people in general, I'm going to talk about one of my favorite articles is written by the author Willow Liana. And at some point, you may want to go and also search up this article and read it for yourself. The title of the article is All the Lonely People, the Atomized Generation. And so Ms. Liana explains the concept of social and societal atomization as the breakdown of families and cultural groups into their radically individualized elements. She does a very good job of doing this, pointing to multiple issues like social media, relocation for work, and like the delay and avoidance of marriage and family. And to me, this is at the heart of our political breakdown, this concept of atomization. So in order to delve into how the Solidarity Party can help fix what is broken, I want to expound on three things mentioned in the article. First, Liana explains that careerism in companies and organizations whose size and reach is too vast to understand for the worker removes people's abilities to truly gauge how we can impact and influence the world around us. So if you consider moving up the corporate chain, you just become a cog in the wheel and you don't really get to see like what your job actually is doing within the framework of the entire company. And this is true. I teach high school, and high school teachers have the benefit of affecting students on a day-to-day basis, and so we can see the immediate reaction of most of our work. But in terms of like the entirety of what's going on in the school, and this is kind of what administrators want us to do by looking at data and patterns of how the entire school system operates, like we're not particularly influential in that, right? We affect our kids. But most people in corporate settings don't have the immediate effect of their customer base. Like they don't see what they're doing with their customers. All they're doing is making one small part of a widget operate and then sending it out and hoping things go well and that they get their paycheck, right? And maybe a promotion. So that is a problem. And if you couple that idea of not being able to understand like what you're actually doing in the world and what influence you have with how social media and mass media disconnect us from the local and plug us into the global, we kind of lose our recognition of how to make a real difference in our actual lives that make a difference for what's going to happen in our futures, right? We get stuck in our virtual lives and with our virtual friends and our virtual interests. And so the status that we seek is often something, like people want to be influencers, in social media, and they want to be important to people they don't even know, like in their company workspace. And so what often happens is you have to put on a facade over your real self with your core values and your principles and your deeply held beliefs so that you can fit into what may be I don't know, like the corporate workplace, I guess the woke system, perhaps, and what you really might think is true, and the deeper things of life. Okay, so second, we've been inculcated with a truly false sense of freedom. Okay, the left bombards us with the idea that bodily autonomy is like the highest sense of freedom. Like what I do with my body is none of your business, and I'm only free if I can do whatever I want with that. And you can kind of extrapolate like the issues that go into that. And then the right exhorts us about the complete freedom of the market, and then the denial. And if for those of you who are Catholic and know some social teaching, the traditional sense of the universal destination of goods, that goods and services are meant to be shared, and they're most valuable when the largest number of people can benefit from them, especially the poor. So Liana mentions that these are affronts to the classical understanding of freedom. True freedom, which comes from self-mastery, is a search to get to a point where we are free to do what we ought to do, not what we want to do. This idea of doing what we want to do, she aptly describes as license and not freedom, right? It's the license to do whatever I want. Like the law doesn't prohibit me from doing what I want to do. Okay, it's the ability to do what one desires without interruption or barrier. So that's a major problem. Is this false notion of what is freedom? Third, Liana talks about the loss of place. So in his book, The Great Good Place, Ray Oldenburg explains that the comforts of home with our family, that's like the first place for human beings. So that's our first location where we thrive and where we generate our closest relationships and have our deepest meaning. Okay, so that's called the first place. And then most people throughout tradition and throughout history have had a second place where they work that, I would say more in recent times, right? Especially after the 50s and 60s, when women started working outside of the house as well. Like everyone was out and they had a second place where they worked. And even there you have coworkers. And I know for myself, I have very meaningful relationships with my coworkers who are my friends, and I've been working there for over 27 years. And so over that time, these are people I've come to know. I know their families. I know their beliefs, right? Their deeply held beliefs and their values. And so that's a source of enrichment for people to have a second place where they leave their primary place and spend a big amount of time giving of themselves and then receiving from others, humanity. But then he speaks of this idea of a third place, right? It's a place that isn't your home and it isn't your workplace, but just another place you go to have another layer of enrichment, right? He defines third places as places where you get to relax in public, where you encounter familiar faces and make new acquaintances, okay? And so as you might imagine, those are not things that you would do necessarily with your family. You're not making new acquaintances. You know your family, and you probably know your coworkers very well. But these are rich opportunities to extend your social connection into the world because there's new people there. Okay, so traditionally, for the longest period of time, this would definitely be a house of worship for most people. Your church, temple, synagogue, mosque. It's a place where you're definitely going to go very often for religious services, and you're going to meet a lot of the same people, but then new people come in and you get to encounter them. And, because you have a shared background, a shared faith, there's a richness to that relationship. But also third places that aren't religious, such as local establishments like coffee shops. Bars would be a common place that you can question whether that's good or not, but there's definitely some good social activity going on there in terms of meeting people. Bowling alleys, social clubs, golf courses, community centers. These are all locations where people found value and something extra outside of their family and their work setting, right? You might stop off somewhere for a little bit of time just to kind of let off some steam and meet some folks and have good conversation. So what is happening in society? Well, first of all, in the third place, right, our most remote location, which is an important part of our development, people are no longer going to church. This is a common crisis. You hear about this all the time, that the unchurched is a growing number of folks. And as that is like a weekly encounter that you can count on that people don't have, that's not a source of enrichment for people in their lives and connection to their neighborhood and society. People are no longer joining bowling leagues or other sporting clubs. They're not doing social organizations. Like I'm in the Knights of Columbus. You see locally they have the Lions Club and the Elks Club. If you go to any of these meetings, predominantly the people who are in these meetings are older folks, right? Older women's organizations, or women's organizations are usually predominantly older women. And so people are not hanging out and doing those kind of things in these organizations. And even to a certain extent, they're not even outside talking to their neighbors. This is very, very common that people don't know their neighbors and don't get out and have a chat to see what's going on in the lives of the people around them. That would be their primary source of support if something went wrong and your family wasn't immediately available, okay? Or they would be available for your family. So third places are evaporating around us, right? And then we go, come back from that, if that makes sense, that now we have an increasing number of people who are working from home. This became incredibly common after COVID, that people would just stay at home and log in remotely and accomplish most of their work tasks from home. And they may jump on a conference call to deal with business that needed more than just themselves and another person. And so the work still gets done, right? That there's lots of research that shows that productivity really hasn't dropped off in the workplace in businesses when people work remotely. But something that's definitely true is people are not going to out for lunch, for example. They're not stopping out for a quick drink, after work. They're not hanging out at the water cooler talking about what their kids are doing. And so these opportunities to have deeper relationships with folks they're not available for those who work from home, right? So people have lost a second place. And then, a large segment of folks who are not going to church and they're not going to social organizations and they are working remotely are also young folks who have, they're delaying marriage and they're thereby delaying having children until they're much older. And a lot of times they've relocated for work. And so they don't even have a first place. They don't even have that primary location to interact with your deepest loved ones, right? That you hold the deepest bonds with, because an empty apartment is not a social environment. You're alone, right? You're by yourself. And so that really cannot be called a first place, according to Ray Oldenburg. It just doesn't apply. It is not a socializing element, and that leads to atomization. So I believe that these issues play a significant role in why our politics is broken. Okay? If politics is defined by the process in which we work together to distribute resources and find agreement with one another, how are we supposed to do that if we are all broken from each other into these disconnected units with a false sense of freedom and then no sense of place? That if we don't value place, how are we supposed to agree on how to help other people find that richness in their lives when we don't even understand what it is? Okay. So creating that framework for why I believe politics is broken, and that the depth of atomization is very real. Okay. I can attempt to begin the conversation of how can the Solidarity Party redeem American politics. Actually, the can is not even in there. Sorry, Will. It's how the Solidarity Party can redeem American politics. That's where the can goes in that phrase. So first, okay, within our principles, we begin with a post-liberal exclamation. Well, two exclamations. One of our principles says that we believe in the centrality of family. Okay, that family is the cornerstone of everyday life and of society. And so right away, we speak to this notion of the first place as a unit where like true wealth of spirit and collegiality and development occurs, right? And so that's first and foremost. And we also say one of our principles that we also believe in a community-oriented society. The society is not a bunch of individuals that are seeking their own way and trying to find their path in the world, and to do the best they can by themselves, right? We believe in community. And so in accordance with this, or in tying this together, from the tradition of Christian democracy, there is a concept called personalism. John Paul II was a great advocate of personalism. The acknowledgement of personalism is the acknowledgement that human beings are made by their creator for one another, right? And St. John Paul would say that, I mean, going all the way back to Genesis, right, as a symbol of this exact concept of personalism is that, Adam and Eve are made for one another. Adam is alone and God recognizes that this is a problem and he makes Eve. And so you have to understand that Christian democracy as a philosophical and political construct came about because there was this major battle philosophically in the late 1800s between rampant capitalism, unbridled capitalism, and the specter of socialism that was also gaining steam at that time. And so Christians looking at these two non-Christian ideals said, well, what do we really believe about this? And personalism says we are not radical individuals, as the capitalists would have us believe, okay? Nor are we cogs in an industrial machine, as like just workers, right? Worker bees in an industrial society. As at that time, the social idea of the workers rising together and acting as one. We're individuals. We're mothers and fathers. We're children, siblings, cousins, neighbors. We're mentors, parishioners. We're part of something bigger than ourselves, and we thrive in those roles, right? When we are not in those roles and we are separated from those roles, we actually experience far more anxiety, far more social and mental distress because of the lack of the power of the human relationship. And so we recognize that society thrives when people are with people in meaningful and healthy ways. Okay, so our principles in the American Solidarity Party allow us to begin the journey to healing politics. It's just the principles themselves. The next stage, though, in this redeeming process requires addressing each of the issues of atomization that Will Oleana sets out. Okay, so the first one is the sense of powerlessness at the vastness of the global theater. It's just something that she says that we just don't see what we can do. Both of the major political parties, they now operate both ideologically and financially at a macro and global scale, right? They purposely grouse and fight over the most divisive of issues. That like they look for those issues that we can fight about because they know it's going to fire up their small core base voters and generate big money from that base and from special interest groups. Like that's just what they do. I mean, if you haven't been paying attention, that's what Trump's been talking about, and that's what Harris has been talking about. All the little side conversations and arguments that say that the other side is the devil. And so at that macro scale, it seems like all we can do is pick one of those sides and kind of root for whichever side of that battle we want to support, right? And what is the American Solidarity Party response to this, right? So what we can do is go on the local side with a focus and an adeptness that neither of the major parties can, okay? And so why is this the case? Because local politics, first of all, the ability to do that is very, very real. There's a very low barrier to entry in local politics because most people are doing what I just described. They're just so tuned into what the Dems and the Republicans are doing that they only think of those issues and they only think of politics as those issues. And this is true in the American Solidarity Party as well. We have people that just focus on these big time issues and they can't fathom how the politics of family and community might just be the mundane things that happen in a very local government setting. And so that's the first thing, is that we can easily do it because no one else is doing it, right? If you go to your town government website, like I did for the first time, sad to say, this year, so I just turned 50 this year, and I had never gone to my town government website to see how it operated and how my town government operated. And so I went there and I noticed many of the town councils, and then like when I say town councils or the subcommittees, I'm talking about things like the Parks and Recreation Board, the Fire Safety Board, the Public Safety Board, Transportation, Tourism is one of the committees that is in my town, right? Many of these boards had vacancies on their committees. And once every year, they kind of say, hey, who wants to volunteer in these spots? Well, that's like what comes out to the town, once a year, like in an email. But like at any time, if there's a vacancy, you can just call the committee chairperson and say, hey, I see there's a vacancy. Do you mind if I take that vacancy? And then they have a short meeting and say, sure, you're interested. No one else is interested. Come on in. Okay. So we have these openings at that local level. through appointment, right? And also through election, it's possible to have access to local races because I know in Illinois, which most of you probably are Illinois residents, our local elections are in April after the midterm or we'll have a April 2025 election cycle. And the voter turnout for that election cycle is very, very low. And I'm talking like 12% of the electorate will vote in that election. And so why can the American Solidarity Party make a difference here? Is because there are still enough folks, and we hear this all about like the number of church attendees is dropping, and it is something that to be very concerned about. But there's still so many people that do believe that God is the source and destination of all goodness and still has a place in our daily lives and should be involved in our decision making. And at the very local level, to discuss these issues and maybe not show up at a town committee meeting saying, like pounding on a gavel and saying like, I believe in God and God tells me to do this or whatever. That's not what I'm encouraging. But what I am encouraging is to get together with folks at your church, to get together with maybe other people that are maybe not at your church, but, share your common values and say, these are issues that we feel are important, and discuss like running people in those local elections for races that may not be high ticket moral items, right? But having people with good values that believe in family and community can drive some of those policy things and maybe even protect policy things from becoming liberal, right? So if we're looking for a post-liberal world where we don't look at individualism as the apex of all life and activity, this is going to be something that's very important. So when I was running as the ASP candidate for vice president in 2020, many of my friends, even lesser acquaintances, they knew of my campaign, right? They voted. They said, "Yeah, I'm going to vote for you. Totally, I vote for you." And then like years later now, they're like, "I voted for this guy." Like at dinner parties and get together. It's kind of awkward, but they did vote for me. We had 9,000 votes in Illinois, myself and Brian Carroll for president. But none of them were really excited about the Solidarity Party or even advancing the ticket, right? Like I don't think they went door to door or did any kind of help for the campaign. But this year, I've got 4 friends who are running for the library board in my hometown, and they are running as ASP candidates, but it's actually a nonpartisan race. So when they get on the ballot, it'll just be their names. It won't say anything next to their names. But when we share our message with folks around town, we're talking about these are men who have agreed to take the endorsement of the ASP. They believe in our principles and they're standing for our values. And so the people in town, their friends and their family, and the other folks, their acquaintances or whatever, they're very excited about the promise of having their voices heard on the library board through these good people by winning an actual election. And so the ASP in Illinois has grown from 60 members on January 1st, 2024, and we just got our 120th member today. I got an email from a guy that I asked to have him join, and when he joined, I checked our voter roll, and we got to 120. And my goal was to get to 120 at January 1st, 2025, a whole year. But we already got there. It's October 30th. So that's very exciting. But much of that has to do with this local push to get people energized about what we could do at the close level, right? The city level. We know that the voter turnout in April is going to be abysmally low. In terms of like a major election, it's hard to predict like how many votes you need and what work you have to do to get elected. I already know that in 2022, the highest vote getter for library board was about 2,400 votes. That's what the highest vote getter got. And then there was like drop off from there, and the top 4 people were elected to the library board. And so what we can do in our local race is that we can reach out to people, we can get names, we can make phone calls, get a spreadsheet, and see if we can get like 3,000 or 4,000 people to commit to voting for our guys. And we know we have a win. That's what you can do at the local level. That's how you can make a difference in politics. And remember that it's not just making a difference getting someone elected, but it's getting someone elected that believes in community and family and these ideas of breaking up this notion of atomization and liberalism. So this confronts the first issue that Willow Leanna talked about, which was people not thinking they have the ability to make a difference in their own lives, right? They can, and the ASP can kind of show that way by taking over small towns, right? Our towns and our positions around town, by making people realize that together we can make a difference in our lives, in our direct lives. Okay. Second, governing with actual principles and morals, right? So Liana's second concern was the idea that people don't understand what true freedom is anymore. And so the ASP prides itself that our platform is based on Christian democratic principles and what we call Catholic social teaching, right? We often have a question that people say that you have to be Catholic to join the ASP. No, you don't. Brian Carroll, who I ran with in 2020, was an evangelical Protestant, and I consider him a great friend. And we talked many times for hours about how much he enjoyed just the concepts of Catholic social teaching. And it wasn't something that you needed to be Catholic to understand, even have any idea of Catholic catechism. It's just the teaching of the church over many years from straight biblical principles, right? The two major parties and the other third parties are bound in some way or completely, in the case of the libertarians, to the broken notion of freedom being equal to license. That if people can be stopped from telling me what to do, that means I'm free, right? When I was running for VP, I spoke to many of my non-political friends, because many of them were asking me, like, what are you doing? Like, are you crazy? Like, you're spending all your time doing this. And I tried to explain to them, right? The reason I'm spending so much time and energy doing this is because I want to try to fix our broken political system. And I said, people of goodwill, whether you're Christian, specifically Catholic, or a different faith, or even not any particular faith, they understand. Okay, this is a fundamental understanding of people that I know, that I discuss this with. To live a healthy life, okay, with our loved ones and our neighbors, we have to understand that we are bound and burdened by these relationships. This is a fact, and that those ties are actually good and healthy. I explain this to people. And so, like a story, I would say this is a very common thing. I have a lot of friends that are about my age. Like I said, I turned 50 at the time. I was 46. I said, I can't just go home. I shouldn't just go home. It would be very bad for me to go home and tell my wife that I just spent $2,000 on a brand new set of golf clubs, right? That just would not be a healthy move in my marriage, right? And this is true, and my friends would agree. I said, you wouldn't do that, and none of them, they all said, oh, I would never think to do that. She'd kill me, right? And the reason you wouldn't do that, and I wouldn't do that, is because that I'm like understood and bound by in our relationship, in our marriage, that financial concerns of that level, right, are made in concert with each other, because it is critical to our family and our future to not be throwing money away on frivolous things, right? And so that burden is not a bad thing. Like the market, right, and the classical liberal notion of you should be able to do what you want when you want to do it says that, yeah, go to the store and get what you want. It's like you made the money. Like if you've got the money from your check that you earned through your work, you should be able to do that. And that's the response that I would give to them, is that we just don't work that way. Like life doesn't work that way. Families don't operate that way. Marriages are not successful that way. And we can't work as a society that way. So we have to understand that when we engage in political discourse based on actual values and principles, that there's a possibility of healing the process and fighting back against what the major two parties are trying to do, which generally is push for their liberal principles of the freedoms that they want, right? And which that's the things that they basically ever get away with, right? That's what they always want to work on. Those are the policy issues they're running on. And so, to have a concrete politics that's based on actual values is very, very important. Okay. And then third, right, is the idea of working with people and understanding place, right? The first place being the home, second place being their workplace, and in the third place being like social organizations. And what I would say is that if we work as the American Solidarity Party in a very local atmosphere, right, we're working with our friends, right? We're working with our friends, our neighbors, the people that go to church with us, the people that our kids go to school with, and you get a good sense of good people by finding out how their families operate, what jobs they have and where they're working, and what social organizations, and you probably belong to a lot of the social organizations. It's a richness in that community setting that allows you to find good people to collaborate with and to organize with politically. And if you're organizing with good people that are bound by those places, that have healthy connections to other people, you know that your politics is going to be sound, right? You can avoid the brokenness and the atomization of folks who don't have those places, and they're going to come at you with the lack of relationships and a sense of good relationship. And so when you're trying to make policy and you're running for town council, you're running for library board or school board, like you've got people around you that are core, they have core principles, and they're also grounded in the sense of community and family. And it's critical to have that to build a solid politics. The national political scene is so broken because so many people in leadership positions as candidates don't have that sense, right? And so the American Solidarity Party really has the ability to kind of lead the charge at that local space and create pockets of folks that really are doing a good job with politics. And the more we do that, and the more we kind of combat this notion of atomization, the more we can move forward. At some point, like I really need to get to a pet project that I have, which I call intentional solidarity. And you may have seen an article about this, but intentional solidarity is essentially a pushback on this concept of atomization. And one of the things that people often say, right, is that if you're not moving forward, you're moving backward, right? If you're pushing a boulder up a hill, you have to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing. If you stop and let go, that thing is going straight backwards, right? It comes like to exercise. If you stop exercising, you're going to atrophy. You have to always keep pushing forward. Well, what I think in our society, the way it's structured, the way that mass media operates, social media operates, how our economy operates, and unfortunately our broken political system operates, that if you're not actively looking to improve your solidarity with your family, with your coworkers, with your neighbors and your friends, those relationships decay. They atrophy over time. They need your intentionality, right? They need your focus. They need your attention. So I think that kind of pushing forward on those concepts is something that we can do as folks in the American Solidarity Party or friends of the American Solidarity Party to build a new political scheme and an organization that can redirect like the brokenness of American politics into something that's whole and that is healed, okay? And in the end, in the sense of fixing something that isn't quite right, is redeemed. And so that's what I would say to the answering the question, how the Solidarity Party can redeem American politics. And I think with that, we're going to open the floor to questions. Will, I don't know how you want to do this, but I'm open and willing to talk.
All right, so I'm thinking for questions. Since all you guys took your time to come out here, if any of you have questions first, I was thinking because we're recording, if you'd like to just kind of come over here and speak it. Yeah, ask Mr. Patel, and then yeah, we can have it answered. So.
No, I was thinking.
Oh.
Sorry, I was sorry. Like usually, like I get up usually. Well, I don't get up. Yeah, I'm just thinking.
Sure. All right, well, I guess if I wrote like 2 questions ahead of time that I've heard as like kind of, yeah, just in case no one had any questions. So, well, you guys are definitely thinking and formulating your best questions, hopefully. I had a few, really just 2, but the first one is, what would we do in the event that one or both of the major parties sort of catches on and tries to then contest us at the local level? Could that? I guess it seems like the objection would be like, wouldn't that just bring the typical problem of you're going to take away votes from the lesser evil, and then the greater evil will win? Wouldn't that just bring that problem back to the local level? And I've definitely heard sort of along those lines. Don't we want to like focus on a platform like first that can actually win, and then like one that or well, what I mean by that is like one that the majority of people would like already agree with, and then once you kind of win with that, start shifting the platform or getting more people. I've also heard it phrased in terms of like a caucus, but there seems to be this like desire to kind of infiltrate to, I guess if you want to use that word, one of the major parties. Usually I hear it more from the Trump perspective or the Republican perspective. And that might connect to like issues of how far away is the Trump perspective from ours. I guess all of those, that's kind of a lot of questions sort of.
I was gonna say, like, that's a lot of stuff. All right, let's start with the first thing, and maybe then we can bounce kind of back to the other stuff. Is that, what I'm talking about, what I'm proposing is there is no local parties, right? These are nonpartisan positions that I think we can get, right? Like we can get access to and create a base of supporters with that don't require they like the Republicans, Democrats don't even pay attention to this stuff, right? And the reason they don't pay attention to this stuff is that there is no R or D behind the person's name on the ballot for these races. If that makes sense, right? So you could be collaborating with folks that vote down ballot Republican or down ballot Democrat for the rest of their ballot, but because the relationships you're building, when I was talking about, with folks that you trust, their families, where they work, what clubs they're involved in and how they operate around town, and you work with them and you're doing those things together. I mean, you're doing service with them, and you may never even bring up these hot button big ticket items, divisive items that the Republicans and Democrats like to fight about. At the local level, you're talking about how do we create policy and how do we make a difference in our everyday lives that make our families stronger and make our communities healthier, right? And so I'm not really concerned about the Democrats or Republicans finding out what we're doing and trying to stop us, because I just hope they would just join us, right? I think what I'm saying is it allows us you would see that coming, right? Because your coalition that you're forming and the base that you've created is who they are, right? It's not like this kind of faceless monster that lives nationally that ends up generating 100 million votes or 80 million votes for one candidate or another. Like, you don't know who any of those people are. You literally know your candidates very, very well, right? And then your candidates are going around meeting people, and either through primary relationship, like the people you actually know. Like, I know all 4 of the candidates very well, right? I know their families, I know their wives, their kids, I know what they think. We've had many conversations. But like, and many people do, because they're outgoing guys that are very involved with their parish and so forth. But like, I also know people myself very well who know me as a person of character, that trust me in my opinion, and they know my family, and they know my wife and my kids and where I work and what things I do. And so there's going to be people that vote for these guys who will vote for them based off of just my word. They'll say, you need to vote for these guys. They are fantastic people. And if you think that I'm trustworthy and a man of my word and my honor, then vote for these guys. right? So that connection, like somewhere will that could get broken, right? Like by some bad actor. But like that's the beauty of the super local, is that if the Democrats or Republicans, want to get into that space, it doesn't matter. Like if they're a good person, like the fact that they vote Democrat the rest of the time, I can still work with them to get the person I want elected that will make the difference in the races that I want to make at the very local level. Right, which increases our size as a party, it increases our influence in that space in our town, right? And then as a party, then what has to happen is that we just need to recreate this town to town to town to town to town. And if we get enough towns in Illinois, like in a county, then you can actually maybe get a county seat. Now those start becoming partisan. But if you've done the work from town to town at the nonpartisan level, when we erupt and go after a county seat, like we'll just take it. They won't have any chance to stop us, right? Because we will have created it with grounded, good, moral people that are not atomized, that don't work off of self-interest. They're working for the common good. And until then, we're making a good difference within our base lives. How far are we from that? I have no idea, right? I have no idea. What I do know is that, for those of us that are on this call, and that the majority of people watching this in the future, we're committed Christians, and we know how the church started, right? It started exactly the way that I'm describing this concept, this process, right? You had the apostles in the very, very core connection with our Lord, and then they went out and they started communities, and those communities started very small. And how did they thrive? And I'm not sure if you know this story, but like the reports are there in Roman history and in Jewish history, where they look at the Christians and they comment, like, see how the Christians love one another? It's insane. It's crazy. Like, how could they love one another like that, right? Because people of antiquity didn't believe that, right? They didn't believe that you could go out of your way for your non-family members, right? I'm sure they'd sacrifice for their family, but complete strangers. But that's what they did back then, and we've forgotten that, right? If we recapture that, then there is no limit to what we can accomplish.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anyone have any questions that they
Yeah, I do. Sure.
So I'm actually pretty unfamiliar with the American Solidarity Party. I had a quick question about what is like the economic plan, all the party, like what, like, how do I put it, like which direction do you guys view when it comes to taxes and those kind of things?
Okay, fair question. So I'll keep it tied into kind of the basis of this talk, but I think Will can direct you into much deeper questions or much more in-depth conversations on what we think is appropriate when it comes to higher level economics and the concept of distributism. But I would say at the very, very local level, right? And this is really pertinent to the idea of library board. One of the guys is running for library board. He's very, very I would say red, right? He's probably a Trumpy background. We've all agreed not to discuss our presidential politics during this campaign, even though I strongly support Peter Sonsky, and I've given them all Peter Sonsky material. By the way, vote Peter Sonsky. This will be published before the election. Still, if you have not voted in Illinois, there is no reason not to write in Peter Sonsky, because unfortunately Harris is going to win by 1 million votes. But anyway. This gentleman, he pointed out that after the school, the largest line item tax thing on his tax bill was the library, and the reason it's such a large item is that the library board and the park district got into a huge fight several years ago. It's probably been 4 or 5 years now. And basically the argument was the library wanted to expand a little bit, and it was going to infringe on the park's land slightly, and they kind of asked for the land, and the park district said no. And so then the library basically kind of went to the government and tried to, I don't even know what that would be called, what is that called when you eminent domain. They tried to eminent domain the park district, right? And got into this ugly local spat about like who should have access to this. And they ended up, in the end of it, just building a new library. Completely unnecessary to build a new library. The old library was fine, like in terms of its building, it was not falling apart or anything like that. And they spent millions of dollars to build a new library. And so his strong opinion is that that was a financial disaster and a disgrace, and he wants to work on like that line item value, right? And I go, well, you can, I'm not going to fight you if that's your passion on this, but like, one of the things that I would say is, if you have to pay taxes, and we can use like the library, right, to really benefit our community in ways that we may not even have considered yet, right? Like you could try to find ways to decrease those tax dollars, right? Or, in the very local setting, you can make your tax dollars more productive. You've got the ability, right, to bring in policy that utilizes the financial assets of your town at the local setting, like on a town council in a committee or something like that, where you definitely don't have that power at the state or the national level, right? You pay your taxes. If you don't pay your taxes, IRS comes to get you. You can cry about it all you want, right? And you can say this is how it should be done, and this is what the policies should be. And those of us in the American Solidarity Party and leadership can be very, eloquent in our crafting of ideas. But it's all dream theater, right? None of it's meaningful. You can make a real difference with how that stuff happens at the local level. And I think that's how the American Solidarity Party can make a difference, is that saying, hey, if we're going to spend money, let's spend it to benefit families and community.
Did you have any other questions?
I think that, yeah, that's it for now.
Yeah. Anyone else had any questions? I want people to come up.
Oh, my head's slightly cut off, but my name is Declan. I wanted to give Will a chance to ask you a few more of the broad questions that allow you to really talk about the party before we get into the kind of like, what's your opinion on this issue sort of questions. But my question was about the situation in Palestine, the war which started in Gaza and has now escalated to Lebanon. It's obviously of a lot of importance domestically because it might cost the Democrats the election with the people refusing to vote for it. And I was just wondering, what is the position of the American Solidarity Party on this? Because I think that generally the American Solidarity Party has a very correct position on foreign policy, but this issue has taken on a life of its own in the last year. And I think that it should be addressed separately.
Right. Well, I mean, you know what, like, that's a great question. And we address one of the things with the party, right, and positions. This is a question that specific question has been asked many, many times in this election cycle, and really for the last year since the attack on Israel last year, where we had we had an anniversary not too long ago. And what I would say is, like, as a party, right, like when we say the American Solidarity Party as an apparatus, right, like that's one thing, and then obviously the individuals would be another thing. And if you think about like the Democrats or the Republicans, right, neither of those parties has a position on anything recent, right? Any like recent issue that comes up, they don't have a position on it because they don't talk about like those kind of things as a party. Like a party has a platform, right? And they have a convention, and maybe something like a resolution might come out of a convention about a topic. And so we're very similar in that regard, that we have a platform. Clearly, if you look at our platform, we look at one of our core principles is international peace, right? And through solidarity. And so, that would be like the first and foremost thing about, like, we just don't want this conflict to continue. We want it to de-escalate. And obviously that would be an easy response, right? Peter Sonsky has put out a blog post on this. And so I would encourage anyone to maybe just do a Google search on Peter Sonsky and the Palestinian conflict, Israel-Palestine conflict. And so he does a really good job of articulating kind of his approach to this, informed by the platform, right? because he is the presidential candidate, and this is his time to have that spotlight. And so I would kind of defer to that in terms of a very specific response. But what I've told people, right, and this is not directly from the platform, and it's not directly from anything besides my mouth and my perception of the topic, is that one thing, right, that the one way in the history of this conflict, and in the history of this conflict is not 1 year old, as you well know, right? This has been going on since the reinstatement of Israel as a country, after the Second World War. And the concept of solidarity, I think, really comes into play here, is that, there have been times where, maybe an olive branch has been reached out to one side or the other. But like internationally, and even between countries, like, the combatants, the two sides, have not looked at each other as neighbors. They have not looked at each other as often as human beings, right? Is that they're lessers, right? They are the opponent, and they are in competition, like, for land, and this is like a common issue, right, in society. And in the United States, we've kind of worked our way through kind of land battles over a long period of time. But this is still hot and fresh, and I'm not sure how much you know about the conflict, but I know, like, I just hear stories of there are Palestinians who still have, like, the key, like there's an honored place in their house for the key to the house that they had that they were displaced from when Israeli settlers came in, right? So that's like, we're talking about deep wounds. And internationally, what we say is, oh, we want to de-escalate the battle. We don't want people to fight. But, like, there's much deeper issues here. And, that relationship building is a very hard thing to do. And, like, there should be avenues where we bring people together to discuss that. The problem with, like, kind of terrorist organizations is they're not interested, in that process. And so it really puts a difficulty on international relations, right? That's all I kind of had to say about that. Like I said, you really should look at Peter's statement. I can actually see if I can pull it up and I put it in the chat. See if I can get you this. Might be in his blog. Well, anyway, I'll look for it while we're going. Does somebody have a follow-up, another question?
I'm up here. Come.
It's nice to meet you, Amar. I have a question. Does the American Solidarity Party have a plan to address the national debt crisis? And if so, could you describe it for me?
You know what? I've actually come across a lot of writings on this, and John Maydai is going to be speaking at the in the week speaker series as well, and I've talked to him about this. And one of the things that it's really interesting is that the way our financial monetary system is like, there's a lot of talk about the debt crisis, and what's funny is, like, what he would say is that money isn't real. There is no debt crisis. Like we're no longer bound by a gold standard. And so when you say we're $40 trillion in debt and $50 trillion in debt and whatever, as long as money's value is determined by the government and the money itself is owed essentially to ourselves. I mean, like, people say, oh, the Chinese own all our debt, and it used to be the Japanese own all our debt. And the reality is, like, the power of the U.S. government still is if, let's put it this way, if the power of the U.S. government failed, that would be a much bigger issue than the debt that we have right now. In terms of what the Solidarity Party's, like, approach to that would be, I mean, we definitely have spending issues in the country. But in general, we also have just this notion of, why do we have such a huge spending problem is because our entire economy is based on consumption, right? And I think before you talk about debt, you should talk about how does everything work, right? And I'm not sure what you guys do. You know, I teach high school in terms. I'm not sure what you guys do about like your what should I say here? Your entertainment that you get out of buying like food and beverage that is you know, overly pricey. I guess is, you know, if you go to Starbucks and get like $6 drinks, you know, I have high school students who walk in on a daily basis with their you know, Dunkin' Donuts Breezy Blast or you know, Coolada Cooler or whatever, and I'm like, how much did that cost? They're like, it was like $6.50. I'm like, I don't spend $6.50 a week on coffee. You know, like I don't know what you people are doing. You know, but like our entire economy is based on like bad decision making, right? Like that, like as religious people, we should be deeply offended by like how this all goes. If you really think about how everything goes down, right? It's based on buy stuff, break it or use it and throw it away, create more of a mess, and then buy more stuff, right? And there's a comedian, I can't remember who it was. It was a hilarious bit. You know what? It's Jerry Seinfeld, right? So Jerry Seinfeld talks about like our whole like way of life is to create trash, because the second you buy something new, you are just now creating trash, right? It will very soon become garbage. Like, and whether it's this week, next week, or a year down the road, it's going to be in the garbage at some point. You're just trying to turn it into garbage, and it's just, he's making a joke, right? But so like that would be like the deeper question of like, how do we look at consumption? How do we look at our interaction, our economic interactions? And then how does that then turn into this massive crisis that we have, that the government has to keep, you know, spending money to plug in holes where we keep spending ourselves into?
Would you say it's a culture of irresponsibility mixed with a lack of accountability?
I mean, that's fantastic, right? Like, again, it goes to like our the very principles that atomize us, right? Like our spending patterns do essentially, you know, break us apart because, you know, not to castigate anybody that goes out and spends $7 a day on drinks or whatever, but like, you know, back in the day, and then people, you know, I'm a Gen Xer, and so my parents are you know, in their 80s now, and like their philosophy, and they're immigrants from India, and so their philosophy, like as they started working in a new country and you know, saving money and putting things away, like their whole philosophy was you never spend anything that isn't absolutely necessary, because all of the money that you're getting is for the next generation, right? Is to make sure that that generation will go on and have a better life than we had. And then you kind of inculcate those values into the next generation so that they always look forward to pushing that to the next generation, right? And that's just how like success occurs. That's how generational kind of wealth or maybe not wealth, but at least stability happens. And so you see the instability in our life is based on this loss of this feeling that the burden, right, and the binding that you have to your future generations, right? Like people don't have that binding. Like, oh, I'll just get whatever I want. I want to get this drink, I'll get this drink. I want to eat this food, I want to buy these clothes. You know, it's no big deal. It doesn't matter that might not need it next week. I want it now, right? And so again, like I said, I don't want to make anybody, I'm not trying to make anybody feel bad. I'm just saying that it's a different mindset, right? And it's not like you came up with that mindset and one day decided that way. It's like everyone's doing it. That's just the societal norm, and it has a cost, and that kind of is where we are. We're atomized and kind of broken, and it leads into our politics as well.
Thank you.
I put the Peter Sonsky blog post in the chat, so if you can grab that and save it somewhere.
Nathan, 1 second, Nathan. I'm going to. Right. Please feel free.
Hello. I have two questions. One is very surface level. Donald Trump has recently talked about using tariffs as a tool of improving American industrial power.
is that in line with the American Solidarity's idea of subsidiarity?
Okay. So, yeah, I mean, the concept of tariffs, I mean, like heavy level economic, like macro stuff, right? You know, before we would get into like tariffs, we would like to examine like what our industrial base, and if you think about like industrial processes and the way we view corporations, right? And when you talk about industrial stuff, a lot of times you kind of jump to corporations, but there's a lot of small scale industry as well. One of the things that makes us you know, not competitive in the world, where we kind of we've lost our industrial base, is that you know, when you have a kind of a capitalist norm to your business sector, right? One of the things that happens is you are bound by profit, and so if you've got a board of people that are making decisions on how your company is run and how like you have employees and what manufacturing you do and what products you're going to make, if all of that's based on profit because you need to pay out shareholders who don't work at your company, right? And this is like the thing that I think when people really dig into like what is a capitalist structure, is that if you're like have public stock, and we'll start there, which is again most of the big industrial kind of centers. You know, you're not beholden to your community and you're not beholden to your workers, right? You're beholden to stockholders, and the stockholders have nothing to do with your product and they have nothing to do with your community. They're often just like not foreign, but they're outside people that you owe, right? They bought some piece of your company. And what we would say as the Solidarity Party is you could correct a lot of our industrial issues by having a more distributist nature, right? And that doesn't mean that you know, you can't have corporations. Like that's the first thing people say. Well, not every business, you can't, you know, have an industrial mom and pops, you know, people making like the first thing people say is you can't make a Boeing, like mom and pop shop can't make a Boeing airplane. I go, no one said that. Like that's not the concept, right? The concept is that the way like ownership is currently structured is antiquated, right? We have the technology in place, we have the monetary systems in place where Boeing, for example, doesn't have to be a publicly traded company, right? That the workers can have some stake in it. You can have management, you can have higher level employees that do the engineers that are designing planes can be making, you know, six figures from their talents, and then the people who are constructing the planes might make, you know, half that salary or whatever, but they could still be making a living wage, right? Where we don't have to move our construction centers to third world countries to have cheaper labor in order to save enough money to pay our stockholders, right? And I think that would be the primary thing. Like the specifics of tariffs, you know, I'm not like an economist, but what I do know about economy is that a lot of our problems in our economic structure is this idea of profit by people who are actually not doing any of the work. And the longer I've kind of been in this realm and seen this, the more I look at it as kind of like, you know, getting a free ride, right? Like making money. It's dishonorable to make money for something you didn't do. You know, people would say like, well, you took a risk by investing money. It's true. It is true that you take a risk, especially when you're just like a normal person, middle class person, that you have a 401k or whatever. But like the vast majority of investment comes from wealthy people, right, and banks that are not really taking a risk. Like if they lose that investment, it doesn't make a difference in their lives. Like they're still going to have their cars and their house, and the family's still going to go on vacation. It doesn't, you know. Like the idea of an investment risk, like in the old days, was like you put your money towards a business, and if that business goes under, you might be homeless. Like that's not really a concern, I think, for most investment positions.
The second question I had was, in keeping with the party's view of subsidiarity, what responsibility do the nation, and then local governments, what responsibility do they have for immigrants and refugees?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, that's an awesome question. So the deeper thing, the higher level thing, or the clearer thing, I guess, like the refugee, right? Like the person that is they're in the position of risking their lives. Like they're making a move, they're running from something that like as a teacher, I can say very clearly that our school and our school community has been strongly impacted by both the Ukraine-Russian war. We have lots of Ukrainian students that are in my school, and the vast majority of them actually are good students because their parents are professionals. They were the ones that were able to escape because they had the means, they had the technical background, the educational background to get like exit visas from Ukraine, and however they got out of Ukraine and made their way through Europe, they ended up in the United States, right? But we also have a lot of refugees that come from like Guatemala or Honduras, right? And that's the other side. These are kids that war-torn areas, and they're coming to school with almost no educational background, right? They don't speak English, but let alone not speaking English, they don't even know, like they're high school students. I teach high school. They don't even have like a third grade education, right? And so there is something to be said that a nation, right? So you kind of said at the national level, like a nation of our largesse should be able to absorb some of that. Exactly how much is the debate, I think, to a certain extent. And then at the local level, there's just so many like heroic stories of what localities can do to make that work, right? I can't remember the name of the movie. This is not a refugee situation. It's actually about an orphans, right, and more like foster kids. But there's a community, and there's a church, a strong church within the community in Texas, I believe. Has somebody seen it? I haven't seen it. I want to see this. What's it called?
Yeah, I think, was it the community called Possum Trot?
Very possibly.
I think it was Sound of Hope.
Yes, the sound. Okay, yeah, that's right. The sound of what?
Sound of Hope.
Sound of Hope. Let me look this. Sound of Hope. Yes, yes. I've only seen the trailer for it. It's one of the Angel Studios pieces or whatever. But I've seen similar things to that for refugees and immigrants, right? Like when like a large batch of refugees that kind of comes into an area, is that there really is no limit, right, to what we can do. But what I would say, kind of tying back to the talk, is that if we bind ourselves at a local level, like right now we can't do it, right? We just can't do it. There's very few localities that have the structure in place that aren't atomized that can handle this, right? People are just doing their own thing. But it's, if you think about how many like Christians live in a town, and how much like maybe a family might need, like a refugee family might need in order to survive, and like if there was organization, how resources could get diverted, like it's staggering what we could do, right? The reason we can't do a lot of things is because there's just no organization, and like you're talking about subsidiarity, the federal government works way too slow. I mean, what they're good at is throwing money around, right? But when the federal government or any government really throws money around, you can pretty much be guaranteed that there's red tape involved. And once red tape is involved, then bureaucrats get involved and everything slows down, right? Whereas in like church, right, in church settings and in private relief kind of situations, that's not the case, right? Like people like work off their own passion and their spirit. And so I would say that subsidiarity wise, like, that would be something at the lowest scale of government. You probably have the least amount of red tape and the fastest access to sub organizations like churches, that if we were organized politically, kind of through our power as churches, like we definitely should not organize as churches, right? There's definitely that fine line of where that could get your church in trouble, right, if you were organized that way. But as church members, right, and people of goodwill, like you could really make a lot of good things happen. And these crises that occur could be deeply lessened by the power of organization.
So to get this right, you're saying the community is best equipped to help refugees would also be the ones that have sort of already accepted and grown that strong community bond, that they have already addressed the needs of their community, so they're then able to bring in and address the needs of people beyond their community.
I mean, yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think it seems to stands to reason that the reason we can't take care of our own people is because of atomization, right? It's like the refusal to understand that the burden of our neighbors and our friends and our family or whatever, like, it's just too much because we don't want to deal with them, and so we don't know how to. The more we kind of wrap our minds around this process, I think the better equipped we'll be to handle those external kind of issues when they arise, when you have to take care of more people.
Thank you.
All right, and then I actually had a thought too. Mr. Patel, you can tell me what you think about this, but I think that actually does a lot of good to answer a lot of the worry, I think, about like immigration and the concern of like this sort of liberal view of immigration, which is like there needs to be no borders between nations. There's no like people just come and go, and however, that sort of is a result and a view connected to that atomization. That if you have that sort of culture, that strong like culture and community, then when we would take in, you know, a certain amount of people that we could take in, they would become, you know, integrated as Americans, and so you wouldn't have the same concern about like, what if we have all these people who are, you know, not loyal Americans or who don't really want to be Americans? It's like, well, if we don't have any community to offer them, then you're certainly not going to get any loyal Americans. So
yeah, I mean, that's actually like a great point. And one of the things that I think, you know, that we don't talk about, people who say, well, you know, you bring in people like from Latin America, right? They're going to become Democrats and vote Democrat. It's like, well, you've basically just given up. Like these are socially conservative people, right? These are people that are in the wheelhouse of, at least for the American Solidarity Party, they're in our wheelhouse for sure, but they should be in like the Republicans' wheelhouse if they want to continue to pretend like they are socially conservative, which I think that has kind of lived its life, right? Like they can't really pretend that anymore. But if they would like to, then you have to at least understand that you just can't give up on immigrants, right? Immigrants are way more socially conservative than the typical Republican is at this point, right? The typical American, I should say. The typical American that was born in the country and raised in the country is a liberal, right? You're an atomized person that exactly is described by what Will Oleana said in her article, right? You have no sense of place, you have no sense of family. I'm talking about the average person, right? Whether you vote Republican or Democrat, like you've been fraught with this your entire life, right? You've been indoctrinated with this, like, I do what I want mentality. When immigrants come to the country, they come with still a deep sense of tradition and family, right? Like their cultures are not liberal cultures, right? So what you would need to do is try to convince them that there is a politics that works in their favor, and would have them enjoy their culture and their richness, but understand that we want the American, like, again, like, I've actually said this to you, what is the American culture, right? Like there is no American culture. There's no singular American culture. And like kind of our singular American culture is actually a very negative thing when we talk about in this light of the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, rugged individualism. I mean, that's what Chad Pecknold basically said is the disaster, right? Is that we've kind of made that as the moniker of Americanism, is that you can do it by yourself, and everything's around the world is falling apart based on this mentality. And the age-old mentality of a family and community, it worked for thousands of years, before we kind of gave it up for this new nonsense.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions?
Another question?
Hello, Amar. My name is Kevin.
Yes,
It's nice to meet you. I had a quick question because you mentioned at the end of one of your responses to another person how important it is to promote policies that promote the centrality of family and community. And I was just wondering if you had any examples of tangible policies or things that we can do on the local level to promote that family and community, if that makes sense. Because
absolutely.
I like that as a concept, but it's kind of hard for me to visualize like tangible examples, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. Right outside my backyard, right? And so my house opens up to a park, right?
Okay.
And one thing that the park district did that was very good, right, is that they used to be like a soccer field in my backyard. I mean, there are still some soccer fields, and families would come on weekends to play at soccer games, and they'd watch your kids, and so that was a family event. That's a good thing, right? But there was like a soccer field that was directly behind my house that was very rarely used. It was like a very small size field for like the little tiny midget kids, like the littlest toddlers. And they kind of moved and made one of the other fields accessible to the little kids as well. But they put in a pickleball court, which is not part of the story. That just happens to be the first thing that you can see out of my backyard. But beyond that, they put in a whole like family area. There's like a big gazebo that has got benches, and it's got a whole like little kids what do they call that, an obstacle course where you can climb up ropes and run up and down, and it's got a start, it says the word start on the ground, it has the word end, and what has happened is like this kind of dead space in town, right, is constantly in use. There's always like someone coming by. I don't think you have to rent it, it's just an open space, but people will bring food and they'll picnic there. And what's fascinating, I mean, like, and it's so that's already like a that was an expenditure that was put forth by the park district, probably, right? And there's space in town. There's that can be done more for, and it's a very important thing that I think enhances our town and its quality of life for families, right? One thing I will mention, just kind of an interesting thing, is the ethnicities that frequent that space more often than anyone else are local Muslim families and Hispanic families. I rarely see like white families and groups kind of using that space as like a gathering ground. I mean, there's plenty of white kids playing there. I'm just saying that when someone comes in as a group, those are the groups that do it. And that kind of goes to my point of here are two traditions that still have deep, value in the sense of family and community, right? And so like at the Solidarity Party, like, we definitely pride ourselves in being a Christian Democratic Party, but like, we've got fertile ground in these communities, right? And if the Republicans, like I said, actually believe what they say about social conservatism, they would be going into those communities and getting membership, right? That's why I doubt that they actually do. And so that's one thing. Another thing is like I was one of the things that I didn't bring up is, again, I don't want the talk to be too long, is people say, well, I want to. I actually had a guy, fantastic guy, who asked me, I want to run for town council in his community. Actually, no, I should say city commissioner, which is equivalent to mayor. And he goes, what should I do? Like, what's my processes, right? I said, well, how many people do you have that will support your campaign? He said, like, he had like 2 or 3 friends that were really close, and maybe 4 or 5 other people. I'm like, okay, good. You've got like a campaign staff and someone will support you. But my second question is, what is it about the current city commissioner that you want to replace, right? Like, what's that person's problem, right? And he goes, I don't know. I have no idea. I said, so you don't know what values they stand for, what policies that they've been pushing locally, that you think you could do a better job on? And he goes, no, I don't. I said, well, then the first thing to do is maybe call the guy, right? Or like at least look into local newspapers and look around, because maybe you like him, right? Like maybe that's like he's doing all the things that you would do, and there's no reason to politically run for that office. Maybe you just politically work for that politician, right? And you get to know them and you build a relationship and support what they're doing if it's what you want done. And then it's a possibility that when they are done, with being in office because of whatever reason, they might support you into running for that office, and you might win office. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't see these things as like public policy that that people can make a difference. And the reason I mentioned that is my town, like if I was running for town council, the guy who's in that seat, I had lunch with him, and he's like, well, what I really want to do is like my goal, my passion is that families can really utilize our communal spaces freely and safely. And he was like, I want to make bike paths on the streets so families can ride down the street and not have any fear of getting hit, right? And they can get from one park to another park and like not have to worry about crossing dangerous intersections and stuff like that. I'm like, that's awesome, right? Like I that's a policy, vision that he's got for our town that is super family friendly, right? So I'm like, I don't want to run against this guy. I want to support what he's doing. So I'm going to try to get on his committee and build that relationship. So maybe if he moves or something like that, then that would give me access to some leadership, right? But still to support his policy structure going forward. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. I think that gives me some examples and a way to work towards that idea of the centrality of family and community. So Thank you. I appreciate that.
Right. And I think one of the things that you should note there is that, you know, as you're doing that, like you're building, if you were doing that, if you were working in that vein in your town, you're building street cred, right? You're building cred with like everybody else in town. So like if there's a higher level office that maybe becomes partisan, right? Like you're getting to county commissioner, which is often a partisan race in Illinois. And you've made those inroads with everybody in your town about, hey, I've done this for your family, right? That when it comes to county stuff, if you can kind of research and say, what can I do in the county to also enhance your family? People will trust you, right? They know you're for real when you've actually done the things that you said you're going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
No problem. Yep.
Do you have another question?
So, how would the American Solidarity Party address the sort of conjoined issues of homelessness and drug addiction that definitely make a lot of these public spaces unavailable for someone who wants to use them safely and let their children run around on them? Yeah,
no, that's a great question. I mean, you know, that's definitely a question. It's a huge problem in cities, right? And a lot of this stuff kind of goes like, depends on where you're at and how you address different issues. Like I would say like homelessness in my suburban town isn't a problem in public spaces. It, you know, the homeless generally kind of are on street corners, you know, panhandling or whatever, but they don't really operate in, you know, like in San Francisco, you kind of hear a lot of like, oh, the homeless have taken over every public park or whatever, you know, and there's videos of this and you've probably seen it. But I think you're right to say like, you know, what about homelessness in general? Well, the ASP at a macro level, you know, and kind of going again with my talk is like, what is homelessness? It's not its own thing. It's a symptom of a bigger thing, right? It's like what a homeless person is someone that has definitely lost all of their places. They don't have a third place, they don't have a second place, and obviously don't have a first place. They don't have a home. And that is definitely markedly an atomization, right? Like they're broken off from resources and the interconnectedness of whoever was originally in their lives, right? Obviously, there's mental health issues for a lot of homeless people that they might even have family, right? All their family might be all together having a good old time and hoping that person would come back home and they just can't cope. That's a possibility. But then other times, you know, I know of people that, again, that relocates for work, and then their marriage falls apart, and then like a subsequent series of events, and now they're just in dire straits, right? And they find themselves homeless. So I think those are issues that, you know, how do you in policy, and again, I don't know the answer to this exactly, right? But how do you in policy and at the very local level create pathways where that if there's someone if you're in a town and if you're in a good town that has, you know, an ASP presence, how do you make sure that if anything goes down for someone in your town, catastrophic events, that they have support structures, right? That's something you can do at the town level that says, that you create some kind of, maybe a fund, maybe you create a support network where, I've argued, this is not a political thing, this is purely a church thing. I've argued that in like a typical, again, like I'm not sure how many people here are Catholic, but in a typical Catholic parish, any woman who has like a baby, right, like should not have to worry about meals for a long time, because there's hundreds of people in the parish, and if you were organized and you were functioning as a healthy parish, like you would be celebrating that this person had a baby, everyone would know about it, and that person shouldn't have to worry about buying diapers or food, right? Because collectively that would be a minimal cost to any individual family in the parish, and we could easily do that. We should be able to take care of our own. Now, does anyone know that happening anywhere in any parish? In the audience, anybody know like your parish doing that? No, I mean, it's not happening, right? As far as I know. But like, that's what I'm talking about, is that we are a broken people, not just our politics, but even our church culture, right? And our social culture, it's broken. And I think like what we're talking about at the American Solidarity Party is deeply principled beliefs that we need people to, confront, right? And what politics can do is you can really have a vehicle to, push those concepts, push the envelope of relationships and policy creation to drive that, right? It's really what it is. Like someone's got to drive that and influence it.
I do believe my parish does have a program like that, yes. But, okay. My question was more about like the unrepentant drug user. How do you address the issue of someone who has this deep issue that definitely does force a lot of communities to sort of excise them? How do you help that person?
Policy wise.
Yeah, out of
They were
policy.
saying like, through policy. Yeah, I mean, I think with like drug use, and especially some of the drugs, in that kind of consumerist setting, right? Like drugs have become consumerist as well. They just become more potent and more destructive, and so the devastation they leave behind, it's got to have a twofold attack. Like, what do you do in the acute moment of like drug abuse and devastation, right? So like the person's already abuser, they're already addicted, they're already struggling, and kind of a cost to the local society, and at the same time, how do you prevent that, right? Well, the prevention side obviously is addressing the fact that why are people like that? It's because they're atomized and don't have a sense of family or community. But on the other side, there's like, banding together. I mean, there are resources. I think a lot of times that's where subsidiarity comes in, is that at the federal level, you can get funding, but the local level, you got to put that into place and then get, like the police involved in the fire and whatever, to get people who need treatments. Because like, I can't tell you how many times I've heard in a school setting, right? Like, again, it's a social resource. But in a school setting, we have so many programs that are available for, not for drug abusers, which is your question, but for people who need the program. It's there, it's available, it's funded, it's got, all the necessities that are there for its usage, but people don't utilize it because they don't know, right? There is definitely a lack of connection between people that need stuff and the stuff that's there. And again, it's just a thing in our society of like, who's going to get it done, right? It's not my responsibility to get the drug user over to where they can get their help, right? If you have a strongly built community that it's very strongly interconnected, and looking out for the interest of community members, I mean, it's more likely to get done that way when people aren't turning and looking the other way. I think we all know like the idea of like someone's getting mugged, and instead of like helping, they take out a phone and record it. We this idea, right? This meme. I think like drug abuse and homelessness is very tangential to that, right? It's connected. It's the sense that it's not my problem, and if I make it my problem, like I don't even know where I would go with that. Well, what if you did know where to go with it? What if you had like a person's number, right? And you had if you call the police, they would have the resources to go actually do something constructive, right? Because I think police, if you call the police and someone's like a drug abuser, like maybe they take him to jail, right? That doesn't help the police, it doesn't help the jail, and doesn't help the drug abuser either.
All right. Thank you all for joining for our talk with Amar Patel on how the ASP can redeem American politics. We have 2 more talks tonight, one beginning momentarily on electoral politics and the consistent life ethic. And then we have our keynote speech with Dustin Pieper. So please stay tuned for those. We hope that you're enjoying our talks this evening, and we hope you will continue to tune in.